Hi again, everybody. So today, as part of my Snowy Scares series, I'd like to review The Wendigo by Algernon Blackwood. And I want to first give a shout out to the folks over at Weird Darkness, who on their channel they did a really good job of an audiobook version of the story. I thought it was really, it was the music and voices and effects really added quite a bit to the story, so I quite enjoyed that. I'm a little bit ADD, so sometimes older texts, if there's an audiobook version and I can kind of follow along, it makes it easier for me to concentrate, which is why I listen to the audiobooks along with going through the book as the story goes. So, The Wendigo was published in 1910, and I'm going to spoil the plot here for you. I mean, it's 100 years old. If you haven't read it yet, you can go read it now and then come back. But it's about a group of 4 guys, a hunting party. They're out in the Canadian wilderness hunting moose. Now, 4 guys in the Canadian wilderness in the dead of winter, I'm beginning to think it's just not a good idea ever. So the hunting party, they gather. It's Dr. Cathcart and his hunting guide Hank and his nephew Mr. Simpson and another guide by the name of Defago. So the first night, something weird, like this weird wind goes through the camp, and then they get up in the morning, and then they separate, and the Cathcart and Hank go one way, Defago and Simpson go another way, where there was a fire last year, and so nobody has seen any moose in a while, but they decide to try it anyway. Now, this is my first issue with the story, is I don't really quite understand why they decided to split up. But anyway, I guess for the sake of the plot. And Defago and Simpson sort of go and look. They don't find anything. But then they start talking, and Defago wonders if, he says to Simpson, "Do you smell anything?" And Simpson's like, "No, just the fire." And Defago starts singing the song about the Wendigo. And then things start to get kind of weird, because, he starts, the wind starts blowing, and it gets really strange. So Simpson wakes up in the middle of the night, and he hears Defago crying. And he's like, "Are you okay, man?" And then Defago stops crying, and then Simpson notices that his feet are outside the tent. And then he kind of goes back to sleep, but then when he wakes up, it's just in time to see Defago getting dragged out of camp. So this is the reason that I found it a little bit strange that they split up, because Simpson is like a complete greenhorn. He's about to go into the seminary, and, if he gets lost in the woods, that's going to be a big problem, right? Defago will probably make it back okay, but Simpson, no. So here he is out in the woods all by himself. He decides to go off and, look for Defago. And he starts following the tracks, and the tracks start getting further and further apart, and like much further than any human can even jump or run. And the tracks start to change, and they start to get really strange. So he finds his way back to his own camp, packs up his stuff, and goes back to meet up with Hank and Cathcart again. And he tells them what happened, and they decide they're going to go look for him again after Simpson gets some sleep. And I forgot to mention, actually, they also have a fellow named Punk. He's Native American, and he acts as like a cook. He makes coffee and doesn't say anything through the whole book. So the next morning, the party sets out again. Can't find Defago, can't find him. But when they get back to camp, he's there, and he's just like a broken shell of a man. And he was dragged off by the Wendigo, and there's some body horror as his feet have changed, but it's kind of all told in subtleties, because we never really get to tell what happened, but it's pretty awful. And then we find out that, a few weeks later, he dies. He never comes back to himself. So it's a really good book. Like I said, my main quibble is, why did they split up? I just don't quite understand that. But that was like Hank's idea. He says, you go over there and we'll go over here and maybe we'll find some moose. It's also very much a product of its time. So there's some racist language used that we don't use anymore. And the depiction of Punk is really unfortunate, because on the one hand, he is respected as a cook and sort of as part of the hunting party, but he's described as dirty and stereotypical, and nobody trusts him, and it's just really, I mean, with a modern eye, it's uncomfortable to read, but it is very much a product of its time. And so it's a really good book. It's really suspenseful and well paced. And I really like all the description of the Canadian wilderness. I'm Canadian, we have trees and rocks and trees and trees and rocks and water. And Algernon Blackwood he was a really a big fan of the outdoors, and so his love and respect for the woods and the trees and everything is there. He has a really great way of creating this setting. I also liked that one thing I found was really interesting. Now, I'm not good at queer coding, so maybe if anybody knows anything about this stuff, but I got a serious vibe between Defago and Hank. Like they fight and bicker like an old married couple, and then they disappear off into the tent. So good for them. And I've started reading the Willows, which is also considered like a seminal LGBT work, but I also can't seem to find very much about this kind of thing or about gay coding in, I shouldn't call it this kind of thing, gay coding in Blackwood's work, so I'm kind of looking through it. But yeah, in the Willows, the protagonist is also really excited about, cuddling up to a big burly Swede in a tent, right? So I mean, wouldn't we all be excited to do that? I know I would be. So that's pretty. It kind of makes me laugh. And Algernon Blackwood was a lifelong bachelor. He never married. So I'm beginning to think that there's some coding here. So I enjoyed that part of it. And then the other thing there's something else I wanted to talk about. No, I think that's about it. Yeah, so 4.5 stars. I really enjoyed it. Again, go check out Weird Darkness. Although it was kind of hilarious listening to him do the voice of Defago and giving him a southern accent. That was awesome. It should have been more French-Canadian. But other than that, I really, really enjoyed this one. Oh, that was the other thing I wanted to talk about, was you can see how the influence is there in stories that later use this idea of the Wendigo as like a wood spirit. For example, Stephen King's Pet Sematary. It's like this malevolent thing in the woods, which is kind of one interpretation of it. But the Wendigo that I'm familiar with is, I can't remember if it's Ojibwe or, but in some northern climates, if the people are hungry enough to resort to eating human flesh, then they get taken over by the spirit of the Wendigo, and they eat and eat and eat, and they just get thinner and thinner. But they're never satisfied. So it's like this. It's a spirit of greed and hunger and cannibalism, and so it's kind of interesting that Blackwood's version of the Wendigo is a little bit different from the modern version that I'm familiar with. So, but definitely, if you like old horror, if you like stories set in the woods, check it out. The Wendigo by Algernon Blackwood, and the audiobook read by Weird Darkness. Hope you're reading lots of great horror and staying warm. Have a great day.